morning. How's everybody doing today?
Good morning.
There was no announcements in the back, but I want to make sure that if there's anybody who does have an announcement, it can be heard. Does anybody have an announcement? Okay. Let's prepare ourselves as Mark plays our call to worship.
Chalice, chalice, burning bright, help remind us with your light of how we'd like to live each day, with love and truth helping lead the way.
So last week was the High Holy Days in the Jewish calendar, and this week is Sukkot. So I thought we would start with a responsive reading, 641. There's this interesting reading, and actually Sukkot ends on the 8th day with Shemash Torah, which is a festival of the giving of the Torah to the people of Israel. And so join me on 641 as we read the heart of the Torah. Heed not unreal gods.
You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, nor gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, nor gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien.
You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy.
You shall not steal, cheat, or lie to one another. You must not take a false oath in my name.
You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy.
You shall not defraud nor rob, and you shall not keep for yourself the wages of the laborer until the morning.
You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy.
You must not curse a deaf person, nor put obstacles in the way of a blind person.
You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy.
You shall not be guilty of any injustice, neither showing partiality to the poor, nor deferring to the powerful, but judging fairly.
You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy.
You shall not play the part of a talebearer against your people. You shall not avenge yourself, nor bear a grudge, but you must love your neighbor as you love yourself. I am the Eternal. Join me in our words as we light the chalice. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage. Our first song is 347. Let's join together in the words of affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with one another and with our God.
I walk the unfrequented road with open eye and ear. I watch afield the farmer load the bounty of the year. The beauty springtime never knew haunts all the quiet ways, and sweeter shines the landscape through its veil of autumn haze. I face the hills, the streams, the wood, and feel with all a king. My heart expands their fortitude, and peace and joy flow
Now's the time to share our joys and concerns. If you have any joys and concerns, you can either come up or you can mention it, and we will light a candle for it. Does anybody have any joys or concerns?
This is a sorrow. My new granddaughter that just recently got married lost her mother, Marcia Griffith. She was 58 years old. She was also a colleague of Mark Bunce's at the school, CBA. And this is another sadness. My daughter put down her fourth St. Bernard. She was almost 11.
Any other joys? Sorrows? Let's bow our heads as we lift these joys and sorrows. For all the pain and all the joy and all of the moments in our lives where we hear and are disappointed by whatever happens. And we hear and we feel joy. We lift these things to you in the divine. We ask before you that you would gather them in, and we would harvest learning, we would harvest knowledge, we would harvest connection to those with us. Amen.
it's not really church. Rejoice in love we know and share, in love and beauty everywhere. Rejoice in truth that makes us free, and in the good that yet shall be.
The readings that I'm going to do today are going to be more interspersed within my sermon. So joining me for Song 163. For the earth forever turning, for the skies for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures, for the silent majesties, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to Thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing returning home to our blue green hills of earth. The last 7 or 8 years have been really difficult for me with my relationship with the basic pillar of what I grew up with. This pillar is the part of my conservative Christian upbringing, specifically my evangelical upbringing. I was raised in a church that understood itself as evangelical. I went to a college that understood itself as evangelical. And when I went to a graduate school, they were really interested in me going to that school because I was evangelical. And they were fascinated by that at the time. And then I became a pastor in an evangelical denomination. Now, evangelicalism isn't one thing. A lot of people hear with that word and they kind of think about it as one thing. It's super diverse, and quite varied. And it's more of a organizing principle for how these churches think about God and other people. One of the most important is a personal relationship with God. That's really one of the more important organizing principles of evangelicalism, as opposed to a ritual relationship or a relationship through tradition, like you might find in a Roman Catholic church. Another was the importance of conversion, specifically a conversion experience. This is also one of those things. This is popularly known as being born again. That experience was one of those things that as a kid, even if you were a baby in the church from the time you were born, that was an important thing to have. You still had to have that conversion experience. One of the things that made a really big impression on me at the time was the fact of grace, how evangelicals thought of grace. So another big focus is Jesus dying for our sins. There's a lot of important talk about Jesus dying for our sins. And then the flip side of that was a call to then live a life of character and integrity. Now, there's this movement in the 90s called the Promise Keepers. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Promise Keepers. Promise Keepers was this movement where men, they were really more adults, from my perspective. I was a teenager at the time. 20s, 30s, 40s, especially men with families. And we used to watch these videos, these massive stadiums of this Promise Keepers. One of the very interesting things about this was there was a lot of crying going on in the Promise Keepers. And what it was this men developing relationships with each other and kind of being vulnerable with each other. Which, I mean, today is not something that's looked upon as in a bad light at all. But the other flip side of that was them developing relationships they called accountability with each other, which meant that you would have friends who would hold you to accountability in your integrity. And it was really a movement about morality, about men having better morality. And now, whatever you think about the theories around that, in some ways it was a really good thing. It made a big impression on me as a kid. And a lot of this happened in the context of President Bill Clinton's affair with a White House intern. I remember this very specifically because we had these conversations in my church and in my home. A lot of American culture felt that what Bill Clinton did in the bedroom had no effect on his office. But in my evangelical circles, that was a fundamentally flawed argument. Because when we thought about this, of course it has an impact on what he's doing. His personal morality, his integrity, again, the word integrity was used a lot. His character makes a difference. And what's really funny is that this is the one area of evangelicalism where a lot of it I have kind of moved away from. This is the one area that made a big impact on me, and I still actually really agree with. I still think President Clinton should have resigned. I saw that as an abuse of power, what he did. And not everybody agrees with that, obviously, but an affair like that displayed something about President Clinton's character that I felt, and I still feel, was not good for our country. Now, the irony, of course, is that those people who call themselves evangelical now overwhelmingly believe the opposite. They no longer think character matters and ask to explain why people would support a man like Donald Trump, who so clearly displays characters that we never would have accepted in my evangelical church. Evangelicals basically say his policies are great. Now, this really threw me for a loop. I was a pastor in an evangelical church in 2016. I have to tell you that it was one of the strangest experiences of my life to have been preaching constantly and then have these lovely people who I loved, who were nice, who were kind, who were generous, support someone who was the opposite of everything that I preached about. It was really hard for me to get my mind around this. And, none of us has religious belief because of ideas. Not even an atheist. We develop our religious beliefs and ideas because of a person who was kind to us, because of a habit of maybe breakfast on a Sunday morning and dressing up for the service, of a song that we started singing as a little child and a melody that felt like home as soon as the organ started, with the accretions of seasons digesting in a soil that is the fecund source of our religious life. And for me, that fecund source of religious life in 2016 was tainted. And there's a part of me that says it seems so petty. People are just people, right? Why do you have this problem? But for the past 7 or 8 years, I've been really struggling to come up with some kind of answer to the question, how was I a part of a movement that took certain things so seriously? And how did that movement so quickly, in my mind, flip and chase something that it considered, I'm talking about the movement itself, would have considered completely wrong just 15 years prior. Actually, less than 15 years prior, truthfully. Excuse me. Now, I still actually don't have an answer to this, a silver bullet answer, let's say. And I'm sure it's different for every single person. But I do have an initial idea that has seemed compelling to me. And it's about worship. Now, the title of my sermon, which I didn't publish anywhere, is Worship a la Sukkot. And we're going to get to Sukkot in a little bit. And I'm sorry, this is a really long introduction to that, but hopefully it'll be worth it. Now, worship is one of those words that is used in a lot of churches as kind of a shorthand for what you do on a Sunday morning at a church, or what you do on a Saturday at a synagogue, or a Friday at a Friday for Muslims, or what have you. But worship is a much older thing, and has not always been, nor is it now, something that is necessarily good or even benign. When we think about worship, we often think of a celebration, or praising someone, or simply praying to someone. But it's more complex than that. Worship is often a group exercise that unites a group of people who may or may not have anything in common at all, but who come to feel connected through the rituals themselves. Sorry, I don't have any water. That'd be great. But interestingly enough, the anthropologist René Girard, he was this anthropologist who focused a lot on ritual and sacrifice, in particular, looking at how sacrifice worked in human cultures. He has a theory on the origin of religious ritual, that religious ritual was actually a way to institutionalize violence. And what he meant, his theory kind of goes like this. Communities at times face catastrophes, right? They face horrible events that could happen, a plague, or a bad harvest, or an invasion, right? And what these events generate is suspicion and conflict, and sometimes they explode into outright violence. In the pandemic, you could see that our divisions in our country got even worse, right? So much so that, eventually they erupted into an attempted coup. And this is a common experience in the history of the world. If you read the account of the pogroms of the Jews in the Middle Ages, they often start before people even have a sense that there is a plague. And there's this way in that people find this kind of unity in attacking a person. We call this, we use the word scapegoat, and actually on this past Monday, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, and Leviticus talks about the scapegoat. Interestingly enough, the scapegoat is actually not killed. It is the other goat that is killed in that ceremony. That's another whole other thing. It's very fascinating, but I won't bore you with that today. But it's really fascinating when you think about actually, some of the basic Greek myths. I'm thinking of when the Greeks were trying to get to Troy, and Agamemnon, one of the gods, was stopping them, and Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia in order for them to be able to get to Troy, if anybody remembers that Sophocles play. But in some Greek communities, they actually had a person who would be designated as a scapegoat, or in Greek, the word for scapegoat in Greek is pharmakos. The word pharmakon, which we hear in the word pharmacy, is an agent of healing in the Greek world. But pharmakos was a designated scapegoat. And for example, in Athens, the festival of Targelia was a harvest festival. So this is a festival that happened in May, June. And in the festival, one or two people that were considered to be ugly were chosen as pharmakoi. This usually was a man and a woman. They were draped with fig leaves. They were fed at a gigantic feast. They were oiled up, and they were treated really well. And then they took the vegetation from the fig trees and they started whipping them and parading them around the city and eventually expelling them from the city. And what they sometimes would do, if there were an economic disaster, if there was a plague or something like that, they would actually sacrifice them. And you can see this in lots of stories in the ancient world. There was a story about a guy named Apollonius of Tyana, who was a miracle worker after Jesus, who went to the city of Ephesus. And Ephesus was dealing with an epidemic and a plague, and he brought the people into one of the big meeting areas in Ephesus, and there was an old man who looked like he was blind and who was a beggar, and he told the people, to deal with this epidemic, here's what you do. You stone that guy. And they started stoning him. And the moment they started throwing stones at him, the text says, this is from a pagan author who wrote the life of Apollonius of Tyana, his eyes changed like fire, and they stoned him completely. And he said, after he was completely stoned, they said, take away the stones, and sitting there was a gigantic dog the size of a lion. That was a ritual, the origin of lots of rituals of worship in the world. A group of people facing some crisis, finding some individual thing to put all their energy into instead of fighting each other. Now, I think of one of the best places to see this kind of worship at work in the modern world was in the images of the Nuremberg rallies the Nazis held in the 1930s. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the film Triumph of the Will. It's a terrible film, really is bad. But that last part of that film shows a Nuremberg rally, and I actually watched it last night at like 12 o'clock at night, which is not a good time to watch that. But it was filmed, just at the beginning of the Nazi reign, when the humiliations of World War I were still fresh, at a time when the German people were really struggling. And the images of all these uniformed soldiers, of the music and the rhythms of marching and song, and then this speech by Hitler, which talked of the enemies abroad and the unity of the party, and especially the enemies within. And he uses these words. He uses words like purging the weak, and it's just these kind of like really surprising, like very, very dark and sinister phrases. And this is really a picture of how worship actually often functions. These individuals losing themselves in this collective. The entertainment and spectacle. There's a spectacle involved in that kind of worship. And the finding of a common enemy that brings about these feelings of connection that people will have at these festivities. And you can see this in the responses of the people and the faces of the people. At one point in his speech, actually, Hitler even compares the Nazis to a religious order. He says, we're like a religious order. Now, it occurred to me that one of the reasons that many evangelicals believe that character doesn't matter when it comes to someone like Trump is that they have been participating in a form of worship as they participate in politics. Now, not everybody has gone to Trump rallies, but the rallies themselves have so many features of worship. A Trump rally has people dressed in a particular way and to bring about some basic unity. People who feel connected as Trump talks about their common enemy. And if you've read any accounts of a rally, you'll have heard the way that Trump uses the press, the media who is there, as this common enemy. And how people respond to this is they turn and they boo and they jeer at these group of people. And then you have the actual expulsions of a Trump rally. Again, it's really fascinating. I went back and I read about 3 or 4 accounts last night from The Atlantic about Trump rallies. And one of the ones that was really interesting was in North Carolina near Fort Bragg, where the whole thing was kind of this, and this is often the case, this rhythm of protesters being expelled from the arena, and Trump responding somehow. Sometimes, saying things like, go back to your mother, or I wish I could punch that guy in the face, which actually in that particular one, a guy did get punched. One of the protesters did get punched in the face from someone who was one of the Trump supporters. And even if, this is, again, I think to myself, even if a lot of the people in my parish didn't actually go to a Trump rally, the effect was actually quite distributed in a larger way. You didn't need to be there. There is something worshipful about the media that is being consumed by Trump supporters. An enemy is created, and a unity is created. And eventually, that actually did lead to real-world violence, as we remember on January 6th. Now, I intentionally spent this is a long time before I get to my main topic, which is Sukkot. And the reason why I wanted to really draw this contrast is to kind of talk about worship a la Nuremberg and worship a la Sukkot. Because Sukkot has some of the same elements, but very, very arranged very, very differently. Now, if you don't know, a little bit of background, Sukkot is a festival that started this past Friday, and it's a 7-day festival, and it's one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals for Jews, including the Festival of Weeks and Passover. And it's prescribed by the Bible, and it comes after the New Year and the solemn holy days, like Yom Kippur, which was this past Monday. Sukkot is not solemn, though. Sukkot is supposed to be joyous. And it culminates in Shemoneh Atzeret, which was the day that Jews celebrated the giving of the Torah. And it's meant to be the most joyous festival in the Jewish year, because Jews really see themselves as people of the book. Now, Sukkot, or booths, as some translations have it, is a festival where people are supposed to live in temporary shelters In the modern time, I think a lot of people, what they do is they usually eat in these shelters and they spend the evening there, but don't necessarily live in them. And they're supposed to do it away from home. This was the temple in the Bible, and it still is Jerusalem now. This still happens there. But Jews in the diaspora have been celebrating it still for thousands of years without having necessarily to go to the temple. And it happens during the last harvest of the year, but it's just before the first sowing of the new year, which happens around this time of year. And that first sowing, just like any farmer that you know now, you sow corn, the first thing you hope for is once you've sown it, you hope for rain, right? And it's the same thing even more so in Israel, because Israel was so dependent upon farming, or upon rain. And Leviticus 23:40 says this. This is what you're supposed to do. You shall take you on the first day the fruit of a stately tree, fronds of palm trees, and a branch of a leafy tree, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord 7 days. When you first read this, it's not clear why you should take these particular branches. Tradition kind of eventually settled on myrtle, willow, date palm, and the citron as the branches that people take. And this word, you shall take you, as for Jews, is actually an action. That's part of the ritual, taking up. So usually you take the 3 branches in one hand, and citron is like a large lemon type thing. And you take that other in your hand, and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go to the 4 ways. You're supposed to, I think, up and down 2. There's some ritual you do with it. Now, part of the reason why these branches are used in this festival is because Sukkot very early on became connected with the libation ceremony that for asking for rain. And all of these branches are plants that grow primarily near water. As attested in the Mishnah and some other Jewish sources, water would be taken in Jerusalem. They would take it from the pool of Shiloh, and they would take it through the water gate, and they would take it up into the temple, and they would pour out the water as a libation for a supplication for rain. And the idea here is that this was a festival, and there's these interesting accounts from the rabbis of an actual festival that I was reading. It was really interesting, where it was thousands and thousands upon thousands of people that would be doing this very thing. They would be dipping the branches in water, and there's all these bowls, and they would be carrying it up and singing psalms as they went up the steps of the temple. And it was this really very participatory pilgrimage to the temple. And then what they would do is they would actually walk around the temple 7 times, 1 time each day, and then 7 times on the 7th day. And they would be blowing the shofar, or the big horn, the entire time. Sounds like another Bible story some of you know, Jericho. It's a very similar idea. And that was this ceremony that was connected to Sukkot. But then Leviticus also does this. It gives kind of a theological rationale for this festival. It says, all natives in Israel shall dwell in huts, so that your generations will know that I made the Israelites dwell in huts when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So the festival is not just about gratitude for the harvest and hope for the rains, but it's also about memory of community and the many and long pilgrimages that the community had taken from the Exodus to the present. Now contrast this with the worship a la Nuremberg. There you have the individual losing themselves in a collective that was represented by some people over here who were in uniform and some others marching. But in Sukkot, all of the people are parading together around the temple. And the collective they are a part of is not moving is not only moving in the same direction, they're parading around the temple together, rather than just waiting for some guy to come down there and start preaching to them, but are also connected through the booths themselves with the memory of their ancestors, who also paraded around the desert for 40 years. So you have this interesting connection that is people moving together, but also connected to their past. And not only that, in Worship a la Nuremberg, there was entertainment involved. If you watch this film, you see that the marching and the songs, it's so amazing because they have all these banners and it almost looks like synchronized swimming as they're walking with these banners and doing all these movements with the banners. And it's meant, of course, today it wouldn't really entertain anybody, but for the Germans at the time, apparently it did. And it's meant for that spectacle of it. In Sukkot, there's also a visual and an auditory element. They blow the shofar. When they get to the temple steps, they actually, at all 15 steps, they sing the 15 Psalms of Ascent. One description I read said that the priests would take their old garments from the year before, and they would tear them up and use them as wicks and hand out torches to everybody. And there would be torches at night carrying this up. So there is a visual element, but again, this is not the spectacle. This is not someone sitting back and watching. This is not waiting passively to receive the message from on high. This is actually being a part of that very message. And then the other two aspects of the worship a la Nuremberg that were so striking are the finding of a common enemy and the unity found within it. And this, I think, is really the most striking thing about that rally. And this is the thing that I find so disturbing, honestly, about Trump rallies. The way Hitler talked about it in his speech was that this rally was a celebration of the Nazi party going from 7 men, he says, to be the only party in Germany. And his purpose was here to talk about unity. But the unity he's talking about is the unity of expulsion. It's a unity of, and he says this multiple ways, in different ways, that the Nazis will be eternal and they will never give up power. It's a unity where you are purging the weak, purging the people who don't agree with you. And that begins with the enemies abroad, but especially the enemies at home. And this is such an interesting contrast with Sukkot. Sukkot is supposed to recall memories of Israel's ancestors, and it culminates in celebration of the giving of the Torah, which seems like this is like the very most specific Jewish thing you could do, right? You're celebrating the giving of the Torah. But in Jewish tradition, Sukkot is understood as the most universal of all Jewish festivals. And in fact, in the book of Zechariah, there is a vision of all the nations participating in Sukkot, and all the nations parading around worshiping God. And there's this interesting passage in the Talmud where a rabbi we're talking about Sukkot, and he says, the reason why Sukkot is so important, he says, these things, 3 things, resemble each other as follows: land, humans, and rain. Rabbi Levi said, and all 3 of them are comprised of 3 Hebrew letters, to teach you that if there is no land, there is no rain. And if there is no rain, there is no land. And if both of them are missing, there is no humanity. While the Jewish tradition understood the festival to be very grounded in its own history, it also has this vision of this festival as reaching out to everybody because it understood that rain is something for all. As the New Testament says, God sends rain on the good and evil alike. Now, for me, when I think about these contrasts, it doesn't really answer the heartbreak that I've felt in this real incongruous experience of growing up in an evangelical world and having this experience happen. But when I read this stuff about Sukkot, it just really struck me how fascinating and how amazing a way to both connect with a particular place, how this festival connects with a particular place and particular people, and brings this kind of connection between history and the present, at the same time understanding that this is not because of a common enemy, but because of a common need. I never really thought about this before. I've read this passage many, many times, but I didn't really understand how important this hope for rain was. And as I reading about this, I realized, well, this is what worship a la Sukkot is about. It's about a connection with the past, with where we are now, and with the future, but a hope that is not just for us, that is not just about our past, but is about everyone's future. Amen. Our closing song is number 54. Our closing words today is actually very short, and it's a simple blessing that is said on Shemoneh Atzeret, which is the 8th day of the Sukkot festival. It goes like this. Praised are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, for granting us life, for sustaining us, and for helping us to reach this day. Let's say together the words as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this chalice flame, daring to carry forward the vision of this free faith, that freedom, reason, and justice will one day prevail in this nation and across the earth.